COVID has forced itself on an unsuspecting world with tragic consequences. As global leaders in tailored, integrated research on reputation and drivers of behavior, ECHO Research has sought to assess the pandemic's impact on trust among business leaders and the general public. A clear way of viewing reputation is as a simple formula based on reputation equals performance less expectations. R equals P minus E. As such, we believe that understanding the changing world of expectations is fundamental to managing reputation, determining risks, and ensuring successful outcomes. Clearly, COVID-19 has been an accelerator of many things, from accelerated awareness and sensitivities to glaring inequalities, through to accelerated demands for systemic focus on climate change and sustainability. The promise of all things digital, AI, and automation excite for good and for bad, while the focus on ethics and health have clearly risen to the top. In this age of reset and renew, we aim to see the patterns, trends, and conversations without bias or judgment. I'm really pleased to share some of the main insights for you as building blocks for your strategies and narratives of change as you aim for better ahead. So I'm delighted to share with you the highlights of a very brief report we did on trust and expectations in the time of COVID-19. For this study, the ECHO team provided an integrated look at businesses' reactions, interviewing over 300 C-suite business leaders in response to COVID-19. They also polled over 1,000 people in the US and the UK in terms of their responses and worries around COVID. And finally, the team also conducted global social listening to the conversations around COVID-19 in relation to business and trust. And I'm just going to touch on some of the top highlights from this combined study. Firstly, looking at COVID in relation to trust. What we found was that compared to the study we did in 2019, trust is down across all the indices. Small businesses certainly are more trusted than government by a long way, but less so than last year. So too, trust in one's employer is down against 2019. Trust in big business is down as well. And trust in government remains very low, and I'll touch on that in a moment. One of the questions we asked of the general public was whether they trusted the government to get COVID-19 response right. In the US, we see about a third of the general population agreeing with the Trump administration's handling of the pandemic, compared to the UK, where only 27% of the general population actually agreed with Boris Johnson government handling of the pandemic. And this breaks down even further when we look at it across the age groups. Here we see Gen Z, the most critical of government response, more so in the UK than in the US. It's the blue line at 17% among Gen Z, primarily due, no doubt, to concerns around the A-level fiasco, right the way through to worries about their future. In the US, it's also low, but the gap is much more significant in the UK than we see in the US. We asked people about whether they were confused or not about the COVID rules. And just under half of the UK population said, yes, they were confused. And this is in November. And this compares to just under a third in the United States, where rules clearly vary across each of the different states. When we look at COVID and corporate response, one of the questions we asked people, both in businesses and in the general population, which companies they admired for their response to the pandemic. There were similarities and differences. Among the business leaders, we see Tesco's right at the top, admired by other C-suite business leaders in the UK for their response to the pandemic, followed closely by AstraZeneca. Among the general public, again in the UK, we see a strong showing by the supermarket retailers for their rapid response, increasing capacity to changing customer demands and requirements. And of course, the ubiquitous Amazon, which came number one in the US, without whom I'm not sure how any of us would have survived the pandemic. We asked business leaders what their most important learning was from COVID-19. And listed as number one was having the culture and capacity to adapt and pivot to the changing circumstances, followed very closely by attention to people issues, mental health, well-being, working from home. This, business leaders said, was one of the most important learnings and things they were paying attention to, followed obviously by a host of other things, but those were the top two. However, not sure that was shared by the general population. Less than half in the US believe that really employers are putting people first, and that's even less when we look at the UK at 36%. When we look at COVID specifically in relation to work, we see a number of issues coming through. And initially, when we looked at the social listening side, there's a mix of emotion from sadness and surprise. The two that I think are the most interesting are anger, which is my red line, which overtakes fear quite considerably from about midsummer months onwards. And this is anger at a host of issues, which I'll touch on in a moment. Certainly, workplace issues were as much in evidence in the social conversations as discussions around furlough, but they were treated very differently. Workplace issues, by and large, were very favorably portrayed. Being able to work from home, the access of digital tools to do so, the fact that people are staying safe, the fact they're not having to commute, a whole load of issues are coming through positively around the health and well-being of staff and the possibility for many to work from home or carry on working from home. However, when we look at discussions around furlough, while as much in evidence around workplace issues, these are much more negative, much more critical about those who have abused the system, right the way through to worry about those who can't even get into the system. So you have a very different complexion coming through around equities and fairness. When we look at relations to COVID and climate change, here we found something very interesting, is that actually issues around sustainability and climate change were not pushed to the back burner as we might have expected. There is as much in evidence as discussions around COVID-19, how businesses are going to respond, and also how they're going to address challenges around sustainability. And here we have BlackRock's calls for increasing evidence and reporting coming through very strongly as well. When we asked people, were they changing their behavior to lessen their impact on the environment, what we found was that in the US, 62% absolutely saying they're changing their behavior, 52% in the UK among the general population. However, among the business leaders, we see that only 47% say they're addressing climate change actions. Yeah? So there's another gap that we have to be aware of. When we look at conversations around climate change, and just choosing 4 particular markets here, we see the US stands apart in having far more negative comment than anyone else, mostly divided across partisan lines. Finally, when we're looking at building back better, we asked businesses what they were planning to do differently as a result of the pandemic. And looking ahead, 73% of businesses said they were planning to cut travel, but this is closely followed by reducing office space and or supporting remote working, sometimes in hybrid situations. Clearly, the acceleration of the use of technology and IT is part of that equation. But when we asked people overall, if society as a whole will be better because of COVID-19. What we see is that only 33% agree with that statement. So bringing this all together, clearly there are issues around minding the gaps. And these are across five key areas: employees, leaders saying they're putting people first, people don't believe that. Empathy, concerns around mental health, long hours, juggling home and work environments, often not appropriate for so many people. Overall worry around health and economic well-being are dominating people's conversations, and businesses have to be so sensitive to this and respond in a way that they've never had to before. Equity. Fairness and equity in relation to diversity and inclusion, equal pay, opportunity are now firmly on the agenda, and good leaders are building in mentoring and development programs to ensure this is addressed. Ethics. The main focus of criticism of businesses at this time has tended to be on ethics, normally in relation to furlough and the use of dividends and bonuses, redundancies, how organizations are planning tax avoidance or otherwise. In this day and age, that is no longer seen to be acceptable. And lastly, expectations for change for the better. Clearly, businesses saying they're embracing a number of changes across a range of different dimensions. But society as a whole is not convinced that we're going necessarily in the right direction. So be it through greater care of our planet, of each other, of our communities, the opportunity is there for our leaders to make a difference going forward, building in measures of success as we aim for better. Thank you. So hopefully that's brought together some really interesting perspectives and useful perspectives for you, particularly to share with leaders and colleagues around you in terms of some of the challenges ahead. Some of these are quite simple, but often the simple things are the hard ones to address. So thank you for your attention. We'd love to hear from you. Any questions, any more evidence that you need or additional insights, I'd be delighted to hear from you. Thank you. All the best.